Hello, Muck Reviews here, and today I'm looking at The Long Dark. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to make sure you don't miss my future reviews. Developed by Hinterland, The Long Dark is a first-person survival game that tasks you with surviving the freezing and arid Canadian wilderness. The game started with a Kickstarter 7 years ago and has been developing ever since with a sandbox survival mode and story episodes, the first two being released in 2017 and episode 3 late 2019. Now, playing this game, one of the first things that hits you is the clear decision to slow down gameplay and focus on trying to make a realistic survival experience. The game's own tagline, "Welcome to the Quiet Apocalypse," a message that really comes across in-game, very much focusing on survival elements over action. And in that regard, the main character isn't yourself or anyone you may meet on your adventures, but the world itself. The whistling wind as it bends around the tree, protecting you from its bite, rumours of wildlife left in the snow, and echoes of life screaming silently at you from every overturned shelf, unmade bed, and discarded tin of stale dog food. Even as it's doing its best to kill you, The Long Dark can be staggeringly beautiful, every frame a gentle watercolour piece. Its crisp white snow and geometric shapes provide the foundations, allowing elements like the texture of the ice sheets, a gorgeous sky, and amazing flickering lighting to steal the show. Up close, things don't always look great, but pieced together it results in some stunning vistas. Weather effects in this game are some of the best I've ever experienced and perfectly grasp how these conditions appear in real life. Wind batters your morale as it slows you down, forcing you to take cover. Whiteouts reduce visibility to almost zero, genuinely disorienting you, and heavy yet eerily quiet snow bottles that magic stillness. Perhaps the best thing about the weather though is how much this impacts gameplay. One wrong move in harsh conditions will kill you, getting turned around in the fog as I mentioned, but also having your clothes soaked through, contributing to hypothermia if they aren't dried by the fire. Wind is particularly impressive, directional, requiring careful use of nature to keep you warm, putting out fires and increasing the difficulty of starting one, even keeping you safe or alerting wolves to your presence depending on whether you are up or downstream from them. The story mode Wintermute sees you following the story of Astrid and Mackenzie. Former partners, Astrid shows up unannounced to pilot Mackenzie's hangar and asks him to take her to Bear Island to deliver a briefcase of unknown contents to a town suffering with a medical problem. Mackenzie eventually agrees and you fly to the island. Unfortunately, you crash land due to an aurora with strange electrical properties and are separated. Mackenzie finds the briefcase but no Astrid and sets off to track her down. Now, when it comes to the narrative, it's not particularly strong. Each episode has a character in which everything seems to centre around, and you'll spend most of your time carrying out tasks for them. The characters you stumble across are interesting to a degree, but mainly because of their strange and mysterious personalities. Whether these characters will get more payoff in the final 2 episodes is yet to be seen, but right now, their stories seem loose and left purposefully odd, so as to not have to fill in their story within the actual game, but rather in your imagination. When this is most characters you come across, it feels like a way to cut corners. While the world has a great ominous character to it, the game doesn't do a great job of revealing its mystery. From the beginning of the first episode to the conclusion of the third, I essentially had the same information about the world around me and the wider story. Is this frost global, or just in its Canadian north? Characters give the impression bad events are very recent, but the world presents itself with notes and bodies and general decay that suggest months if not years of turmoil. The game states an apocalypse, but aren't these pretty standard conditions for a place like this? Throughout the 3 episodes, the story doesn't develop particularly well. It just adds obstacles and blocked paths. Cliffhanger endings, surprises from nowhere, make it feel a bit amateurish, almost as if it's being made up as it goes along. A logic issue can nag at you too. You should be desperately trying to find your ex-wife, as she could be hours from death, but side quests and running errands for characters really detract away from that sense of urgency. There's also a disjointed feel to the episodes played back to back. Initially the game starts off with a unique and lovely art style, but this never returns. Smaller things too, like the ability to skip a section of dialogue once you've read it, being present in the first 2 episodes, but not the third. The objectives given to you by NPCs are generally, go here, get this, come back. There are a few interesting moments that mix this up a little, but not often enough to stave off the feeling of repetition. When the game threatens to have a new gameplay element or experience, it tends to ruin that progress by doing it to death. I found a moment in Chapter 3 fresh and motivating, struggling to trek miles home with an injured person on my back. It was tough, made me think, and ultimately really rewarding upon completion. I felt a real connection saving this person. What's next? Oh, do that again 3 more times, but now with no interaction. Cool. You have to cover long distances often, and whilst this can also be repetitive, it's clear that this is where the game expects most of its story to take place. That's why, despite a fair amount of misgivings, the structured element can be forgiven somewhat, as its missions provide the scaffold on which the true adventure takes place. These naturally occurring tales unfold so much better than the objectives, desperately trying to light a fire before you freeze, counting down your matches one by one, being surprised by a wolf and fleeing with panic, only to find yourself spraining an ankle running downhill and quickly trying to think of anything to put distance between you and your hunter. Things like this happen every time you step out for the day, and you never know what that's going to be. Conditions are seemingly random but can change in an instant, completely scuppering your plan for the day, forcing you to put off a long journey for tomorrow, instead staying close to home, gathering wood for your fire, hunting for food, or boiling provisions of water ready to go. It can also force you into an instant nightmare, making you scramble for survival, overcoming the odds, surviving another day, and the moments that you'll remember. And for this you'll need to keep your condition bar from dwindling down to zero. There are 4 elements that control this: hunger, thirst, warmth and tiredness. The freezing cold will kill you by far the fastest, and so staying warm is always your priority, fires being your best friend. Safe houses, abandoned buildings and firelit caves are all good places to lay your head for the night, just don't forget something to sleep on. Clothes will help too, which you have to layer up and manage their various attributes, including their condition. For food, water and healing, you're going to need to scavenge both the natural world as well as in abandoned buildings. Snow can be melted to quench your thirst, and there's a variety of plants and materials you can scavenge to brew into natural painkillers or bandages. Inside buildings is where you'll find food left behind, but also the tools and gears that you can't pick off trees. Tools like the hatchet that make collecting fuel for a fire much easier, a pry bar for opening locked containers, and a hacksaw for breaking down metal objects. Weapons can also be found, and whilst combat exists in the game, it's not something you'll necessarily be wanting to do, other than hunting. With ammo very scarce, you will want to save it until you need it, often choosing to use a bow unless things are really bad. Weapons aren't the easiest things to control, and that's a good thing, making a rush shot that much more painful due to the wasted resource. Wolves are the main enemy in the game, and most of your frustration will be aimed at them as they surprise you, ripping your throat out and undoing all your hard work. Gear can also be crafted too. Sticks can be broken down into tinder in the inventory and cloths turned to bandages. But more complex items like makeshift tools and gear crafted from the hides of animals you've hunted require workbenches and forges. The game does a good job at being intuitive with its items. Enter a room and see something that you think you might be able to use to help you, and chances are you'll be right. Wander through the woods, you'll find fuel. Into a clearing, rabbits. The frustration can come where the line is drawn and the survival simulation shattered, all of a sudden feeling very much like a game again. And let's face it, it has to be drawn somewhere, but when you've run out of firewood for the stove and previously have broken down shelves in the building you're in with a hatchet, it seems strange that you can't, for instance, pry up a couple floorboards and break them down. Dying when simple options like this could be clearly possible is frustrating. Similarly, paper can be picked and used for tinder, but you can't tear pages from a book. Worse, paper on the floor as decoration can't be picked up, and you can't take hay from a hay bale. These are small annoyances, and I will admit that it's nitpicking, but it breaks that illusion of it being a serious survival game. Not great when that's the game's identity. The amount of calories the game expects you to eat in this dire situation is also insane. Humans can live weeks without food as long as they have water, but here you will die within 4 days. Similarly, unless you go to bed with almost a full water meter, you tend to wake up dying of dehydration. It feels like there could definitely be more survival craft in the game, and whilst there are a few things to build, essentially survival depends on living in existing buildings. In Wintermute, you'll rarely find yourself too far from a friendly base with an infinite fire, and on the higher difficulties of the survival mode, unless you're being purposefully hard on yourself, it's a no-brainer just to shack up in a building. Whilst I'm no wildlife expert, I know that there should be a larger range of wildlife than rabbits, deers, wolves, and the occasional rare bear or moose. Survival mode has mostly the same gameplay features as Wintermute and can be played on difficulties ranging from basically strolling through looking at the lovely landscape to Interloper, where surviving one night grants you an achievement. But the mode differs slightly from the main story. For starters, the objective is only to survive rather than carry out any form of mission. There's a lot less hand-holding here, and dying within the first 24 hours will happen a few times before you get the hang of it. Skills can be leveled up through reading special books and through the continual practice of that skill. These provide benefits like extra calories from cooked food or increased aim proficiency with a weapon. While survival mode is a great challenge at first, after a certain amount of time survival becomes routine. Playing on Stalker difficulty, I'd get some fish, stun some rabbits, chop some wood, boil some water, and repeat. Without any direction, players must come up with their own missions to keep them occupied. And whilst there are a few things to aim for, like completing a full set of hide gear, hunting a bear, scaling Timberwolf Mountain, they all rely on the player putting themselves at risk going against this idea of pure survival. And these things take time, dedication, and a lot of resource and inventory management that some people will find frankly boring or be unmotivated to do once they've proven that they can indeed survive. There's a challenge mode that sort of combines the best part of survival on Wintermute. These longer form missions plonk you in a survival world, but present some guidance and improved motivation. Escaping from a bear hunting you down, racing to set a flare off from a lighthouse, or a slightly less set piecey one, like simply giving the aim of spending 3 days in every location. Summing it up, The Long Dark is an atmospheric and somber journey that truly embodies a lone struggle of one person versus the cold. Whilst the structured story elements aren't the best, the bleak characters carry the tone well, and the distance involved with the missions makes sure to have you frequently spending nights away from safe spaces, where your own story of survival will play out. The survival elements give you plenty to think about, but never so much that it's overwhelming, making it a balanced contest that's challenging but never feels unfair. The weather system will constantly keep you on your toes, but you'll struggle not to enjoy its dangerous beauty. Survival mode gives you a greater freedom to combat the world how you see fit, but there's not a huge amount to do, meaning that the early game is much more compelling than the mid to long game. Whilst usually realistic, too often you will find yourself puzzled by something that seems poorly thought out, such as not being able to tear pages from a book, the lack of campcraft and over-reliance on existing buildings, and a small amount of animal biodiversity. I give The Long Dark a 7 out of 10. Have you played this game? What did you think? Let me know in your comments below, and if you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing. See you later.